Hey, welcome back to Adult Brain Audiobooks. I'm Graham, one of the narrators, and I'm doing the last read. This will be a bit of a long read today, probably, from the MAGUS Book 3, or Celestial Intelligencer, being a complete system of occult philosophy. This is Book 3, the biographies. So today we'll be talking about Albertus Magnus. Let me just scroll down to them there. Raymond Lully, Roger Bacon, George Ripley, Isaac Holland, John and Isaac Holland, Theophrastus Paracelsus, Glauber, Dr. D, Sir Edward Kelly, etc. So this will be the last one. I'm just gonna, we're doing this just to show that we are humans. This is kind of how the sausage is made. We're not robots or androids yet in here in Adult Brain. I'm going to share my screen, and this is kind of how I do. I mean, I've got a split screen happening here, so it's not like if I wasn't live, I would use full monitors, full screens, obviously, for the reading and the editing, but I can show you how I do it. So let's jump into it. Let's see here, share my entire screen. This book was written in 1801, so it's interesting to see what they said about these old magi and alchemists back like 225 years ago. I'll try not to snort, but this loosens up everything in my head as I start to read. So Albertus Magnus, a Dominican, a bishop of Ratisbon, and one of the most famous doctors of the 13th century, was born at Lauingen on the Danube in Swabia in the year 1193 or 1205. Moreri's dictionary gives us an account of the several employs which were conferred upon him and the success of his lectures in several towns. It is likewise said that he practiced midwifery, and that he was in search of the philosopher's stone, that he was a famous magician, and that he had formed a machine in the shape of a man, which served him for an oracle and explained all the difficulties which he proposed to it. I can easily be induced to believe that, as he understood the mathematics, etc., he made a head, which by the help of some spirits might certain articulate sounds. Though he was well qualified to be the inventor of artillery, there is reason to believe that they who ascribe the invention of it to him are mistaken. It is said that he had naturally a very dull wit, and that he was upon the point of leaving the cloister because he despaired of attaining what his friar's habit required of him, but that the Holy Virgin appeared to him and asked him in which he would choose to excel, in philosophy or divinity, that he made the choice of philosophy, and that the Holy Virgin told him he should surpass all men of his time in that science, but that, as a punishment for not choosing divinity, he should, before his death, relapse into his former stupidity. They add that after this apparition he shewed a prodigious deal of sense, and so improved in all the sciences that he quickly surpassed his preceptors. But that 3 years before his death he forgot in an instant all that he knew, and that being at a stand in the middle of a lecture on divinity at Colin, well, that's not correct. So I'm just going to spread this out here and redo that one. I had this tested, but now my headphones are not working. And that being at a stand. Yeah, that should work. Why is it so low, though? Let me see here if I can increase the volume here. That should help a little bit. And that being at a stand in the middle of a lecture on divinity at Cologne, and endeavoring in vain to recall his ideas, he was sensible that it was the accomplishment of the prediction. Whence arose the saying that he was miraculously converted from an ass into a philosopher, and afterwards from a philosopher into an ass. Our Albertus was a very little man, and after living 87 years died in the year of our redemption. Note, when he came before the Pope, after standing some time in his presence, His Holiness desired him to rise, thinking he had been kneeling. That's just too funny. That's like right out of Monty Python and the Life of Brian or something like that. All right. 70 that died in the year of our redemption. Oh, I Did I think that was? Oh, I made a mistake here at the. I thought redemption was the end of a sentence. After living 87 years, died in the year of our redemption. You know what? I'm gonna redo that because I sort of laughed at the end of the note too. That's not proper for the books. Our Albertus was a very little man. I'm going to start at our Albertus was a very little man. Our Albertus was a very little man, and after living 87 years, died in the year of our redemption, 1280, at Cologne on the 15th of November. His body was laid in the middle choir of the convent of the Dominicans, and his entrails were carried to Ratisbon. His body was yet entire in the time of the Emperor Charles V, and was taken up by his command, and afterwards replaced in its first monument. Note, when he came before the Pope after standing some time in his presence, His Holiness desired him to rise, thinking he had been kneeling. He wrote such a vast number of books that they amount to 21 volumes in folio in the edition of Lyon, 1651. Roger Bacon, commonly called Friar Bacon. Roger Bacon, an Englishman and a Franciscan friar, lived in the 13th century. He was a great astrologer, chemist, mathematician, and magician. There runs a tradition in English annals that this friar made a brazen head under the rising of the planet Saturn, which spake with a man's voice and gave responses to all his questions. Francis Picus says that he read in a book wrote by Bacon that a man might foretell things to come by means of the mirror, al-Mukezi, composed according to the rules of perspective. Provided he made use of it under a good constellation, the first brought his body into an even and temperate state by chemistry. This is agreeable to what John Picus has maintained, that Bacon gave himself only to the study of natural magic. This friar sent several instruments of his own invention to Pope Clement IV. Several of his books have been published, but they are now very scarce, viz. Specula Mathematica and Perspectiva, Speculum Alchymy, De Let me just redo that one quickly. I know where that is. De Mirabili Potestate. De Mirabili Potestate, Artis and Natura, Epistoli, Cum Notis, etc. In all probability, he did not perform anything by any compact with devils, but has only ascribed to things a surprising efficacy which they could not naturally have. He was well versed in judicial astrology. His Speculum Astrologiae was condemned by Gerson and Agrippa. Francis Picus and many others have condemned it only because the author maintains in it that with submission to better judgments, books of magic ought to be carefully preserved, because the time draws near that, for certain causes not there specified, they must necessarily be perused. Whoops. I'm going to try and bump that up a bit. I don't know why that's down so low. I'm having weird problems with my mic. It doesn't seem, for certain causes, not there as loud as it usually is in my head. So maybe it's just me today. So I have to redo this sentence, but I don't know where to. I think I'll go back from the quote, I guess, and it doesn't hurt to read the quote again. That with perused is the word I got stuck on, because sometimes I think it's pursued and not perused. That with submission to better judgments, books of magic ought to be carefully preserved, because the time draws near that, for certain causes not there specified, they must necessarily be perused and made use of on some occasions. Naud adds that Bacon was so much addicted to judicial astrology that Henry de Hassia, William of Paris, and Nicholas Orismius were obliged to inveigh sharply against his writings. Bacon was fellow of Brazen Nose College in Oxford in the year 1226. He was beyond all compere the glory of the age he lived in, and may perhaps stand in competition with the greatest that have appeared since. It is wonderful, considering the age wherein he lived, how he came by such a depth of knowledge on all subjects. His treatises are composed with that elegancy, conciseness, and strength, and abound with such just and exquisite observations on nature, that among the whole line of chemists we do not know one that can pretend to contend with him. The reputation of his uncommon learning still survives in England. His cell is shewn at Oxford to this day, and there is a tradition that will I'm just going to redo that part. His cell is shewn. Shoot, and there is, just scroll up while I can here while I'm making a. And there is a tradition that it will fall whenever a greater man than Bacon shall enter within it. He wrote many treatises, amongst which such as are yet extant have beauties enough to make us sensible of the great loss of the rest. What relates to chemistry are two small pieces, wrote at Oxford, which are now in print, and the manuscripts to be seen in the public library at Leiden, having been carried thither among Voysis's manuscripts from England. In these treatises he clearly shows how imperfect metals may be ripened into perfect ones. I'm going to redo it at that semicolon because I mispronounced Vossius as well. Having been carried right there. Having been carried thither among Vossius's manuscripts from England. In these treatises, he clearly shews how imperfect metals may be ripened into perfect ones. He entirely adopts Geber's notion that mercury is the common basis of all metals, and sulfur the cement, and shews that it is by a gradual depuration of the mercurial matter by sublimation, and the accession of a subtle sulfur by fire, that nature makes her gold. And that if during the process any other third matter happened to intervene, besides the mercury and sulfur, some base metal arises, so that if we by imitating her operations ripen lead, we might easily change it into good gold. Several of Bacon's operations have been compared with the experiments of Monsieur Homberg, made by that curious prince, the Duke of Orleans, by which it has been found that Bacon has described some of the very things which Homberg published as his own discoveries. For instance, Bacon teaches expressly that if a pure sulfur be united with mercury, it will commence gold, on which very principle Monsieur Homberg has made various experiments for the production of gold, described in the Memoir de l'Académie Royale des Sciences. Described in the Memoir de l'Académie Royale des Sciences. I'm going to redo that one quickly. Sometimes I'm just not sure. I'm a little bit more accurate when I'm not doing this on which very principle to show everybody. But I think with this book and with this streaming, I can just do some cheating a bit. I didn't like the way I said royal. Excuse me. On which very principle, there's that colon again, on which very principle Monsieur Homberg had made various experiments for the production of gold, described in the Memoir de l'Académie Royale des Sciences. His other physical writings shew no less genius and force of mind. Excuse me, I just had to burp there. Air bubbles coming up and down, and liquid coming down, air coming up. In a treatise of the secret works of nature, he shows that a person who is perfectly acquainted with the manner nature observes in her operations would not only be able to rival, but to surpass nature herself. I'm not going to do the note there because it's just referencing a book there. This author's works are printed in 8 VO and 12 MO under the title of Frater Roger Frater Roger the Shrubber, Frater Rogerius Bacco de Secretis Artis and Naturo, but they are become very rare. From a repeated perusal of them, we may perceive that Bacon was no stranger to many of the capital discoveries of the present and past ages. Gunpowder, he certainly knew. Thunder and lightning, he tells us, may be produced by art, and that sulfur, nitre, and charcoal, which when we separate have no sensible effect, when mingled together in a due proportion and closely confined, yield a horrible crack. A more precise description of gunpowder cannot be given with words, and yet a Jesuit, Bartol Schwartz, some ages afterwards, has had the honor of the discovery. He likewise mentions a sort of inextinguishable fire, prepared by art, which indicates he knew something of phosphorus, and that he had a notion of the rarefaction of the air and the structure of the air pump, is past contradiction. A chariot, he observes, might be framed on the principle of mechanics, which being sustained on very large globes, specifically lighter than common air, would carry a man aloft through the atmosphere. This proves that he likewise had a competent idea of aerostation. There are many curious speculations in this noble author which will raise the admiration of the reader, but none of them will affect him with so much wonder as to see a person of the most sublime merit fall a sacrifice to the wanton zeal of infatuated bigots. See Boerhaave's Kim, page 18. Raymond Lully, a famous alchemist. Raymond Lully, or Raymond Lull, comes the next in order. He was born on the island of Majorca in the year 1225 of a family of the first distinction, though he did not assume his chemical character till towards the latter part of his life. Upon his applying himself to chemistry, he soon began to preach another sort of doctrine, insomuch that, speaking of that art, he says it is not only to be acquired by dint of experiment and practice, and cannot be conveyed to the understanding by idle words and sounds. He is the first author I can find who considers alchemy expressly with a view to the universal medicine. But after him, it became a popular pursuit, and the libraries were full of writings in that vein. Lully himself, besides what he wrote in the scholastic way, has a good many volumes wrote after his conversion. 'Tis difficult to say how many, for it was a common practice with his disciples and followers to usher in their performances under the master's name. I have perused, says Boerhaave, the best part of his works, and find them beyond expectation excellent, inasmuch that I have been almost tempted to doubt whether they could be the work of that age, so full are they of the experiments and observations which occur in our later writers, that either the books must be supposititious or else the ancient chemists must have been acquainted with a world of things which pass for the discoveries of modern practice. He gives very plain imitations of phosphorus, which he calls the Vestal fire, the Offa Helmonti, etc. And yet it is certain he wrote 200 years before either Helmont or my Lord Bacon. He traveled into Mauritania, where he is supposed to have first met with chemistry, and to have imbibed the principles of his art from the writings of Geber, which opinion is countenanced by the conformity observable between the two. The Spanish authors ascribe the occasion of his journey to an amour. Excuse me. The Spanish authors ascribe the occasion of his journey to an amour. He had fallen in love, it seems, with a maiden of that country who obstinately refuses his addresses. Refused. I should redo that, I guess. That's a bit of a big mistake. Poor guy. He had fallen in love, it seems, with a maiden of that country who obstinately refused his addresses. Upon inquiring into the reason, she shewed him a cancered breast. Lully, like a generous gallant, immediately resolved on a voyage to Mauritania, where Geber had lived, to seek some relief for his mistress. He ended his days in Africa, where, after having taken up the quality of missionary and preaching the gospel among the infidels, he was stoned to death. Note, the history of this eminent adept is very confused. Mutius, an author, has expressed that good man, being wholly intent upon religion, never applied himself either to chemistry or to the philosopher's stone. And yet we have various accounts of his making gold. Among a variety of authors, Gregory of Toulouse, check. Among a variety of authors, Gregory of Toulouse asserts that Lully offered Edward III, King of England, a supply of 6 millions to make war against the infidels. Besides manuscripts, the following printed pieces bear Lully's name, viz. The Theory of the Philosopher's Stone, the Practice, the Transmutation of Metals, the Codicil, the Ved Mecum, the Book of Experiments, the Explanation of his Testament, the Abridgments or Accusations, and the Power of Riches. George Ripley. George Ripley, an Englishman by nation and by profession a canon or monk of Britlington. His writings were all very good in their kind, being wrote exactly in the style of Bacon, only more allegorical. As he was no physician, he does not meddle with anything of the preparations of that kind, but treats much of the cure of metals, which in his language is the purification and maturation thereof. He rigorously pursued Geber's and Bacon's principles, and maintained, for instance, with new evidence, that mercury is the universal matter of all metals, that this set over the fire with the purest sulfur will become gold, but that if either of them be sick or leprous, i.e., infected with any impurity, instead of gold, some other metal will be produced. He adds that as mercury and sulfur are sufficient for the making of all metals, so of these may an universal medicine or metal be produced for curing of all the sick, which some mistakenly understood of a universal metal efficacious in all the diseases of the human body. John and Isaac Hollandus. They were two brothers, both of them here. I don't know, that doesn't sound right. I'm going to redo that because that doesn't sound right. That's got to be a mistake. Here, you know what I'll do? I'll just check here quickly. Whoops. Oh, shit. Oh, no. Uh-oh. There. Oh, no. What's going on? I've got the wrong. Do I need to? Oh, no. What the? Oh, no. Can I undo this stuff? Undo envelope? What? Undo envelope? Redo envelope? I really only know this program. Oh my God, what am I doing? I really only know this program enough to just do basic recordings. Okay, what if I click that? Click that. There we go. Okay. Now, please, just, okay. Play. Hey, we're two brothers. Okay, so I'm going to just get rid of that for sure. This happened before. I just can't remember how I fixed it now. Okay, so let's see here. Where am I? This is my backup PDF that's sold. The S's were F's back then in this. How Albertus, Magnus, Bacon, George Ripley, Dr. D. Where's the two guys? Oh, that's Paracelsus. They were two brothers. Ah, I should have known that. I was going to say it was, what was I going to say it was? Got to reposition after the cat left the lap. Here, I was going to say here were two brothers, but I mean, geez, that should have been pretty obvious. Can't believe I didn't get that. They were two brothers. Check. Check, check. Man, my mic still sounds off today. Check. Okay, let's keep going here. I got a bit to go. Got some of the best chapters coming up. Paracelsus and John Dee coming up. Check. They were two brothers, both of them of great parts and ingenuity, and wrote on the dry topics of chemistry. They lived in the 13th century, but this is not assured. The whole art of enameling is their invention, as is also that of coloring glass and precious stones by application of thin metal plates. Their writings are in the form of processes, and they describe all their operations to the most minute circumstances. The treatise of enameling is esteemed the greatest and most finished part of their works. Whatever relates to the fusion, separation, and preparation of metals is here delivered. They write excellently of distillation, fermentation, putrefaction, and their effects, and seem to have understood at least as much of these matters as any of the moderns have done. They furnish a great many experiments on human blood, which Van Helmont and Mr. Boyle have since taken for new discoveries. I have a very large work in folio under their name of the construction of chemical furnaces and instruments. Their writings are as easily purchased as they are worthy of perusal on account of valuable secrets in them, which may pave the way for greater discoveries. See Boerhaave, page 21. Philippus Aurelius Theophrastus Paracelsus Bombastus de Hohenheim, the prince of physicians and philosophers by fire, grand paradoxical physician, the Trismegistus of Switzerland, first reformer of chemical philosophy, adept in alchemy, Kabbalah, and magic, nature's faithful secretary, master of the elixir of life and the philosopher's stone, and the great monarch of chemical secrets, now living in his tomb, whither he retired, disgusted with the vices and follies of mankind, supporting himself with his own quintessentia vitae. Paracelsus was born, as he himself writes, in the year 1494 in a village in Switzerland called Hohenheim, QD ab Alto Nido, 2 miles distant from Zurich. His father was a natural son of a great master of the Teutonic order and had been brought up to medicine, which he practiced accordingly in that obscure corner. He was master of an excellent and copious library and is said to have become eminent in his art, so that Paracelsus always speaks of him with the highest deference and calls him laudatissimus medicus in eo vico. Of such a father did Paracelsus receive his first discipline. After a little course of study at home, he was committed to the care of Trithemius, the celebrated abbot of Spanheim, who had the character of an adept himself and wrote of the Kabbalah, being at that time a reputed magician. Here he chiefly learnt languages and letters, after which he was removed to Sigismund Fugger to learn medicine, surgery, and chemistry. All these masters, especially the last Paracelsus ever speaks of with great veneration, so that he was not altogether so rude and unpolished as is generally imagined. Thus much we learn from his own writings, and especially the preface to his Lesser Surgery, where he defends himself against his accusers. At 20 years of age, he undertook a journey through Germany and Hungary, visiting all the mines of principal note, and contracting an acquaintance with the miners and workmen which means he learned everything relative to metals and the art thereof. Thanks, Benjamin. She's saying we've got some noise. She's saying, I don't know what to do about that. I can check the settings maybe just to make sure. Popping. Yeah, you know what's weird? Something is not right today, and I don't know what it is. Thank you for mentioning that. Bad connection. And I'm not studious enough to know how to redo that. Can I refresh, or will that just completely destroy the live stream? I guess I could try and reconnect. Huh. Okay, let me you know what's weird is I hear it in my mic too, and it's almost like it's almost like my mixer on my end or something like that, because it doesn't sound right for me either. So maybe I will maybe I'll redo, maybe I'll dirty plug. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to refresh and see what happens, and I might have to just reconnect and redo it here. Cancel. Let's see where the settings are for this. Channel level settings. Yeah, I don't see where the where any settings are in here that I can change. Okay, I think I'm going to is it still bad? Check. Yeah, something's wrong. Okay, I'm going to end this, and then I'm going to end this and try again, cuz I think I even have to reboot my mixer. Actually, I could probably just try that. Let me just try that first and see what happens.